SCP-173 is an anomaly that is famous for standing still while it is observed, and for snapping people's necks while it isn't. And unfortunately, medicine hasn't advanced enough to allow us to swap our necks with something stronger, or eliminate them altogether, so we don't stand a chance against SCP-173. However, this brings about an interesting hypothetical question. What would happen if we put SCP-173 against someone with an unbreakable neck? Would the statue manage to terminate the individual? In this SCP Exploration episode, we try to answer this question. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel with notifications on, so you don't miss any of our upcoming Exploring SCP videos. And we plan on exploring more interesting SCP-173 experiments in the future. As we already said, reinforcing one's neck with a steel shroud isn't possible as of now, but it very well could be in the near future, given the fast speed with which modern medicine advances these days. So what if we reinforced a D-class's neck with steel and put him or her against SCP-173? Would the statue manage to break it? Well, if we looked at this question from a purely scientific point of view, SCP-173 couldn't possibly break something like this. The statue's hands are made out of concrete and rebar, so if we tried to grab a rod of steel as thick as a neck with concrete hands and tried to twist the steel, the concrete hands would break way before the steel does, because of concrete's vastly lower tensile strength. In fact, the rebar reinforced concrete hands would break way before the steel neck is even slightly bent. However, SCP creatures are anomalous for a reason, because they defy the laws of physics. Given the large number of SCP creatures that are much more durable than the materials they are made out of, it is definitely possible that SCP-173's body is much stronger than ordinary concrete, and if this is true, a steel-reinforced neck wouldn't challenge the anomalous statue in the slightest. However, these are just presumptions, and we will need to learn more about SCP-173 and about the way the statue kills its victims in order to answer this hypothetical question. The first question that arises when we imagine SCP-173 snapping people's necks is a very simple and obvious one. How could a creature with concrete hands possibly grab someone's neck and twist it till it breaks? Firstly, this would require a large amount of flexibility, something that a pair of concrete hands certainly don't possess. Secondly, SCP-173 would need a lot of dexterity, and given the fact that it doesn't have any fingers, dexterity wouldn't be a word we would associate the statue with. So how does SCP-173 even do this? Unfortunately, the place where one would usually search for relevant information, the original SCP-173 wiki entry, is very short and scarce, and doesn't tell us anything besides what we already know, so we will need to find other SCP sources if we want to learn more about SCP-173. Which is why we need to search for all SCP pages that are tagged with the words SCP-173, and we find a document that analyzes the video feed from a few 173 attacks, and discusses the results of the autopsies performed. Firstly, it is discovered that there is no evidence of external physical trauma to the aforementioned subjects' necks, as one would expect from someone with a broken neck. And subsequent review of the footage in slow motion suggests that SCP-173 does not make physical contact with its victims. And this shouldn't come across as a surprise, given the fact that the statue has concrete hands with no fingers. Instead, frame-by-frame analysis shows that right before the subject is terminated, SCP-173 closes to within 4 inches or about 10 centimeters of the D-class, and the statue's arms remain fixed in their usual rest positions. And in the next frame, less than 0.00001 second later, the subject's head is turned upward such as it stares directly into SCP-173's eyes, and the statue's hands remain at rest. The D-class collapses shortly afterwards. And the reason for that is the neck trauma caused by the rapidity of this head movement, and not physical torsion or strangulation. This is because most D-class personnel that are faced with SCP-173 are already looking at the statue's body, and as such, their heads must only be rotated slightly in order to look right into the creature's eyes, so the speed of rotation kills them, not the torsion. But regardless, this means that the SCP statue kills people by telekinetically making them look at its own face very quickly. However, this doesn't help us understand exactly how powerful SCP-173 is, which is something we will need to know if we're going to challenge it with a steel neck. However, if we check out another SCP document that is tagged with 173, we discover more relevant information. In this document, new containment protocols are discussed and tested, and it is stated that the statue breached from its new containment chamber by ripping through 1 foot or about 30 centimeters of rotted concrete and digging through 7 feet of soil. And once again, SCP-173 couldn't have physically done this with its hands, which means that it must have used some form of telekinesis. And ripping through a foot of concrete is not only impossible with concrete hands, but obviously requires a lot of power, which gives us a good understanding of how capable SCP-173 really is. So with this new knowledge in mind, we can safely assume that even if we reinforced our necks with steel, this still wouldn't be enough to protect us from SCP-173. The statue can dig through a feet of concrete using telekinesis, after all. But just for the purpose of this video, what would happen if we paired it against someone that had an unbreakable neck through anomalous means? Would SCP-173 manage to kill the individual? When SCP-173 terminates ordinary people, it probably telekinetically grabs the person's head and the base of the person's neck and twists them relative to one another, with the goal of rotating the victim's head while the body remains motionless. And of course, the speed with which this rotation is performed kills the victim instantly. But if SCP-173 is faced with someone with an anomalously unbreakable neck, it probably wouldn't realize this on first sight and will first try to terminate the individual in usual manner. However, when it tries to use its telekinetic powers, it will know right away that something isn't right, as it will prove unable to rotate the head in relation to the body. This will probably confuse SCP-173, given the fact that it is used to killing ordinary people, and it will likely want to know how something like this is even possible, and if the whole body of the individual is also unbreakable. So it will probably use its telekinetic powers to twist and turn the victim's limbs, the hands and legs, and see if they are also unbreakable. However, given the statue's immense powers, breaking one's hands and legs wouldn't be an issue. At this point, having broken the victim's limbs, SCP-173 will know that the individual isn't immortal and simply has an anomalously unbreakable neck. But it still hasn't fulfilled its main goal, because if we go back to our SCP-173 origin story video, which you should definitely check out if you haven't already, we discover that the creepy statue is an anomalous art piece that, when created, was programmed to make people look at its face from close range and kill them right after. This means that when the statue is unable to turn the victim's head relative to the body so that it looks right at its eyes, it can simply rotate the individual's entire body so that it is being directly observed. And having done this, it has achieved the goal that is hard-coded into its mind and can proceed to use its powers to terminate the individual, as it usually does with all ordinary victims. It will probably use its anomalous telekinesis to crush the D-class's skull, or if it wanted to make the victim suffer as much as possible, it could rip the victim's body apart limb by limb, leaving him or her to bleed to death. And regardless of how SCP-173 decides to attack the victim after it fails to twist the neck, the outcome will always be the same, and the statue will win, because as far as we know, it isn't limited to neck attacks only. So in conclusion, when it comes to SCP anomalies, things are usually much more complicated than they appear, and facing a creature that breaks people's necks with someone who has an unbreakable neck isn't enough to defeat it. This is bad news for the SCP Foundation, as the obvious things that should defeat SCP-173, such as one eye blinking, which we explored in this video, and an unbreakable neck, both fail to challenge the SCP statue. We will have to find a much better method if we want to defeat SCP-173. This concludes our video on the SCP-173 vs Unbreakable Neck experiment. So what do you think? What would the statue do to someone who has an unbreakable neck? Would it kill the individual or would it let them live? Let us know in the comments below. Please make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, as we have many more interesting videos coming up in our SCP Exploring series, and we plan on exploring more interesting SCP-173 experiments in the future. And as always, we will see you in the next video.